I say this fact often. People don't know apparel and fashion is one of the highest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, more than aviation and shipping combined.
Thank you for joining us for this candid conversation on driving climate change, the intersection of jobs, economics, and the environment. Please welcome Taj Eldridge, Ephraim Beiser, and Brandon Dennison.
Hello, I'm Taj Eldridge. I'm the Managing Director for Climate Innovations at JFF Labs, and we're here at Horizons. We're here for the Vodcast studio, and I would like to thank Bloomberg Philanthropies for sponsoring this as well. I'm here with my colleagues, Ephraim and also Brandon. I want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves as well.
Thanks, Taj. My name is Ephraim Beiser. I'm the Senior Lead Manager at LinkedIn for Workforce and Sustainability Policy Partnerships.
And Brandon Dennison, Founder and CEO of Coalfield Development, based in Southern West Virginia.
Awesome, great. Well, I think we're going to have a really great conversation and robust conversation around this idea of climate and workforce and geography as well. So we're looking forward to it. Ephraim, you work for LinkedIn, and you just released a report around green jobs. What are some of the trends that you saw in that as well?
So we, a couple days ago, put out a report on green skills. And I think that's a really important distinction between green jobs and green skills. One, because what we know about green jobs and green skills is that any job can get greener. And that was one of the kind of main points that we wanted to make. So when we say that 1 in 8 workers has a green skill, we're talking about across all titles and all occupations. And we also think we should accelerate the amount of workers who have green skills. Because if it's going to take a whole of economy approach to transition to a green economy, that means we really should strive to get every worker to have a relevant green skill. We also see that green jobs can be hard to transition into. They often require a lot of previous green experience. With that said, there are some jobs, like solar consultants, for example, that are easier to break into. These are jobs that are high in demand and have other skills, not just green skills, that somebody can use to make that transition. And I think that's really important. We're at Horizons. Skills first hiring is one of the major themes here. And so when you can find a way to get someone into a job, not because of the degree they have, or regardless of their prior title, but really focus on the skills as that pathway, that creates a lot of opportunity.
I think that's going to be disruptive though, right? For so long, so many people have talked about the degree, having a degree, regardless if it makes sense for that job. And now we're talking about skills. Well, I mean, what do you think, I wonder HR communities and HR reps and those folks at these organizations, will it be hard to make them transition to this thinking of skills, right? And I also wonder, what about matching? Like, how am I as a person, when you have a degree, you have this paper that indicates you have this supposed skill set. What will we carry now to show all these skills that we've accumulated? I wonder that. What do you guys think about that?
In one way, you're right. Degrees are often used as a proxy for skills, but we know they're not very precise. And so there's a few things that I think are going to happen. One is you're going to be able to actually have skills, and those skills will mean something. You're going to find other credentials that aren't full degrees that represent a skill set, perhaps more precisely representing that skill set. And there's going to be organizations that are training providers that also can provide some confidence. 'Cause a lot of what this is about is providing credible signals, and sometimes just participating in a training program that employers know is effective can also be one of the ways that you would be able to move into that employment opportunity.
Like micro-credentialing, have some universities like Marshall University in West Virginia starting to look at much more targeted training and really considering that part of the higher ed landscape. So I think how we define post-secondary is completely opening up and broadening right now.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned West Virginia. I'm from Texas originally, right? I think the climate conversation is different in the South than it is in many different places. I always wonder, does language matter when we're talking about this in these areas? I know for me in Texas, I don't even use the word climate sometimes when I'm talking about the impacts of this thing that we're in. What is it like in West Virginia, Brandon?
This transition from fossil to renewables, it is happening, and that's a good thing. The planet needs that to happen. But there are some pretty clear winners and losers in that transition right now, and I'm going to bring place into the conversation. So skills, workforce, investment, huge aspects of this conversation, but also place. A lot of rural communities, coal communities, oil and gas communities. These folks, we've just done our job. Why was coal mined? Because there was massive demand, large on the East Coast, to turn the lights on, to operate factories requires a ton of energy. And we're all a part of this energy system. And coal communities really just did their job and did what was asked of them and are feeling left behind right now and are feeling very angry. And so the language does matter, but in some ways, it's not even about the language as much as the action. You know, these communities are highly skeptical if philanthropy and government and green companies, are they really going to show up for these places? Or are they just going to sort of give a nice press conference and then go back to doing what they actually want to do, which is, you know, destroying a lot of livelihoods? I mean, we have to be honest about that. A lot of people in rural communities are losing their jobs and their livelihoods as a result of this transition. It's not getting enough attention.
I want to follow up on that because I think there's something really interesting, both I think in Texas and West Virginia, which is that families, individuals, identities, in general, we, I think, attach a lot of our identity to our job. But I think in a lot of these communities, there's a lot of generations have worked in oil and gas or in coal. And I feel like there's also identity is part of the challenge. And I'm curious how you all, both of you, have seen this conversation to help kind of help these workers feel included in this transition, that they are also part of the solution, because too often I think they're framed as part of the problem.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think to your point, Brendan, too, is that when I look at winners and losers, some people believe in taking wins or W's. We were just talking about sports, taking losses. I don't look at losses as losses. I look at them as learnings. And I think once we really kind of reframe that, I think is important. But to your point, Ephraim, about identity, extremely important, right? And so I think that we have to think about ways to really talk about it differently and keep that in mind. There's a human element in this transition, right? We've often talked about IQ and us and all the data is important. But to your point, what's even more important is emotional intelligence and how we know and understand how they're feeling, right? Because if that's your identity, you know, we're taking it away, right? We're changing that. So you have to be really emotionally tied to these relationships. And I love the fact that you mentioned about generation, right? And I think when we talk about climate, what we're really talking about is the impacts, the risk, which I think are like the health risk, but also the opportunities to build green wealth and to have new industries that now your family will be involved in for these generations to come.
And I think there's two sides of this coin that I would emphasize. One is a lot of the anger and the hurt that we're feeling, and it is generational, and it is hard to overstate in Southern West Virginia how dominant coal has been and for how long. So like local high school football team, the Miners, you know, we're literally known as the coal fields of West Virginia. It's in trucks, it's on trains, it's on barges. There's Friends of Coal campaigns on billboards, on the radio, on TV. I mean, it's just everywhere you turn, everywhere you look. It's economic power, but it's political and social power too, and it's hard to overstate. The phrase back home is King Coal. But the flip side of this coin is there are opportunities. And coal mining, it's a highly advanced, highly skilled sector. These are not men with lamps and pickaxes. These are engineers. These are architects. These are mechanics. These are very advanced workers. So we helped start the first solar company, Southern West Virginia, called Solar Holler. The first crew chief was a former underground coal miner who was already a licensed electrician because of the advanced nature of the electrical work that has to happen underground. And the tagline for Solar Holler is "Mine the Sun." So I think a lot of times with coal mining, there is a pride that comes with powering the country. And sometimes some of the new jobs that come in, you know, maybe it's a call center or retail or tourism, doesn't quite speak to that identity. But other renewable energy jobs, I think, can speak to that identity if we use the right language and tell a better story.
I love it. You know, there was this show on Discovery called Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe. I loved it. Really talked about all these things. Mike Rowe, if you're listening, dirty green jobs. I gave it to you for free. But, you know, I think that, you know, it's important, right? I think that's really important, this idea of this ownership of I'm doing something that's responsible for my community. I love it. And I think we have to really kind of, you look at it from that way as well for this, also for it. So I think it's great.
And I would add, you know, there's one of the other parts is a lot of people, they don't think of themselves in a green job. For a lot of workers, they think of themselves as, I'm in supply chain, I'm a software engineer, I'm in a job that doesn't obviously have a connection to fighting climate change. And so they don't identify either with kind of being part of this. And what we've seen in our data is a lot of the growth of green skills is among these jobs that we don't traditionally think of as green. So, one of my favorite examples is at companies like LinkedIn, we don't build things, but we do have emissions. Those emissions are from our supply chain. What that has done is put procurement specialists and supply chain professionals on the front lines of the climate crisis. And this isn't a job that people went into to fight climate change, but it's now a job that employers are increasingly expecting those workers to have green skills. And it's a job where, those workers can also see their role in helping companies reach sustainability targets and play a role as part of the solution to climate change.
It's a very good point. And this gets lost. I mean, I'm very proud of the solar company, and so I lead with that a lot. But I think sometimes this challenge does get a little too oversimplified, where we say, okay, we're going to take all the coal miners and we're going to make them all solar installers. That is not how it works. And in fact, that should not be the goal. Part of the problem, our theory of change in Southern West Virginia, is that most of our socioeconomic problems come from being a mono economy. It's the economy of extraction. And we became totally dependent and I would say addicted to this one extractive economy and allowed it to become dominant. We put all our eggs in that one basket. And when we drop the basket, we're empty-handed. And so we've got to diversify the economy so lots of people can thrive, not just people in the coal sector, but multiple different sectors. And so like Industrial Commons is in the room there in North Carolina in Appalachia doing amazing work in the textile field. We've started an agriculture company. Some people for years, they've said like, well, how is that a green company? It definitely is. Maybe it's not a traditional green company, but the carbon implications of where our food comes from, hugely important.
Absolutely. And even textiles. I say this fact often. People don't know apparel and fashion is one of the highest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, more than aviation and shipping combined. And people may say, Taj, are you talking about fast fashion? I don't do that. That's my kids. No, it is our consumptive nature of the clothes that we're wearing with this greatness that we have as a country with the money that we've made. And so we have to think about that as well on that end. And I think that's important. I love the fact, though, that you mentioned about this idea of correct job placement. But one of the things you mentioned, though, Brandon, was about extraction. We have extraction in the climate, in the green space as well. When we're building these EVs, there are communities that get extracted from the materials and the minerals that go into our batteries. They don't have a just transition. I mean, what do we do with that? Like, how do we reserve that and we talk about that honestly in this space of the advent of the green economy?
Step one is we do be honest about it. I think a lot of us who care about the climate, we don't want to say anything bad about any green companies because the stakes are so high. But ultimately, we have to be honest about the challenges in the supply chains of renewables if we're going to get this transition right. So that's step one.
I love it. Ephraim, what do you think?
So I think a couple of things. One, there have been groups who have been historically left out of economic growth and opportunity for generations. We have this moment in this transition where we could say, how do we deliberately include those groups? And so I think that's really, really important. And I think about some of the work I've seen groups like Charger Help have done on EV infrastructure, which we know is so important, and groups like Block Power have done on building retrofits, another really important part of how we're going to ultimately electrify and decarbonize our economy.
Absolutely.
And pay needs to come into this conversation too. I mean, there's an unfortunate reality. As of right now, fossil fuel industries pay better than renewable industries, and it's by a lot, actually, at the entry level, at the worker level. And so that's going to have to level up to get this right too. So we need to include more people more equitably in these workforces, and we need to compensate fairly.
So, I mean, part of what Coalfield Development is doing is helping people make that transition. So what's your pitch? How do you pitch someone to go take a job that's going to pay less, especially when they've been so reliant on this industry that's given so much to their family for generations?
Yep. I mean, we are trying to push the pay envelope. We offer a stronger benefits package. So sometimes coal is boom or bust. So it pays a lot when it's booming. There's overtime, but then there's a potential bust. So our argument is better benefits package, safer working conditions, more time with your family, and look at the trajectory. This is going to be steady employment for a longer period that you can build a career around instead of breaking your body in this boom and bust cycle.
That sounds like a quality green jobs. I've heard that before somewhere. When I think about jobs and I think about communities that are impacted on that, I think it's more than pay, right? I'm in California now, and there are people who are working jobs that live in one community and have to travel almost 2 hours to the next city to work, regardless of pay. And if you ask some of those people, would you take a lower salary just to work close to home? Some will. And so I'm thinking about that a lot when I think about this transition for green jobs as well, is how do we really kind of define what a quality job is? Because we know it's more than just money. It is all these other factors that come into it also. And we have to talk about that, honestly. But I think the other thing I want to say to that point, though, is that we also have to have these communications of these individuals in the room, the organizations, both the job creators, the investment community, but then us on the workforce side that are training and placing. And I think for so long, those conversations haven't been coordinated enough to ensure that we're really kind of building this idea of the wages that are needed to make that transition.
I'm curious, Ephraim, from the tech side too, how do you define tech jobs as it relates to climate resilience, and what are some of the trends you're seeing there?
It's really interesting. So for a lot of tech companies, data centers, processing power is a big source of our emissions. And so now the people who buy power at companies like LinkedIn are thinking differently about how do I ensure we have 100% renewable? And as companies like LinkedIn and others are moving towards AI, there's this question: how are we going to have all the computing power necessary to do billions, maybe trillions of more operations? And that's going to require us to think how we write our code. And so a software engineer, that's a job that there's a green skill for being a software engineer about efficient code development. And then of course you think about not only the power sources of those data centers, but also how do you provide cooling in those data centers? And we bring in other aspects of the green economy that aren't just carbon, but water. And what does that mean for how do we become water positive and carbon negative at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. Definitely. I think scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 are these things that a lot of folks are looking at with their supply chain. And I think that's important. I think that's also going to be a huge part of this market transition for a green economy.
I mean, there's also aspects of how do we model some of this as a company. LinkedIn built a new headquarters, and that headquarters has an all-electric kitchen. And so we know that electrification is one of the key steps to achieving some of our sustainability goals. And so how do we make those choices now and then know that down the road we can also make sure that we're decarbonizing all of our power sources and everything? So I think there's like other ways that all sorts of companies can put their money and investments where their carbon objectives are.
And the Inflation Reduction Act is a game changer. I mean, I think there lots of companies have been leading the way, and now there's direct incentives, massive tax credits, massive investments in grant programs to supercharge this. And if you're a coal impacted or a fossil fuel impacted community, there's actually a 10% booster on those tax credits. And so in West Virginia, we're seeing more, green manufacturers, even tech companies who want to be renewable powered are giving us a look. And so it does feel like, Taj, we have a historic opening here that maybe we can do a leapfrog, and we just have to get this right.
Yeah, but we've been here before, right? Think about it. Over 100 plus years ago, we were all driving horses and carriages, right? And as we made the transition from that to gas-powered vehicles, there were a lot of people who were not happy. The saddle maker, the horseshoe maker, right? A lot of people who built their communities and their industries around it. Literally in the city I live in is a place called Horsetown, USA in California. And they still have all these trails for horses because they do not want to give that up. They're only one place. So I say all that to say that we're resilient as humans, right? We will get to that space where we'll make the transition, because similar to how we made the transition from horse and carriage to gas-powered vehicles, we're making that next transition to where we're at now with the use of energy and the type of energy to alternative places like that. And I think what makes this time better is because we have the IRA and the policies that are behind it. We have the influence from the community that wants it, and we have the technology and more of the data to help this transition make it a little bit easier than before over 100 plus years ago.
Todd, it's funny, we're at Horizons, and one of the observations I've had is we're at a workforce conference talking about climate. And you've been in the climate space for a really long time and have kind of come into the workforce space now. And I'm curious how you've just seen this conversation evolve around green jobs and climate jobs, given kind of the place where you sit at JFF.
Yeah, what made me really think about this is because as an investor, and for years I was an investor from a venture fund standpoint and a fund of fund standpoint, and I was making these investments in these companies and these funds around climate. We want our money to make a return as an investor, right? But I started seeing problems with hiring. I started seeing problems with finding the right talent. And we had people, they would see people that had the passion, but not the skills for it. And that concerned me, right, from a wallet standpoint. And so I started thinking about this space. And I think that it's one of the reasons also that the program at Crest that at Jeff, I'm leading, Crest, was funded by a private equity company who has a $2.2 billion climate fund. The same way I was thinking about that, they were thinking about that. And so I think it just caused an opportunity for these two worlds to collide. But I look at it really differently, right? Like in the early 90s, 91, 92, 93, there was something new that changed the workforce, the internet. Same way. There were a lot of people who were afraid of it, who didn't know how to act on it and everything else. So I think this is a good opportunity for us to really look at on that standpoint as well. So we've had a really robust conversation. I love the fact that we talked about so many things, from the idea of how it affects it from a geographic diversity standpoint, about the reports that are coming about it, about even the conversations here at Horizons by GFF. So I want to thank, again, Bloomberg Philanthropies. I want to thank you both for having this conversation that we're having. And I want to welcome everyone again to this vodcast. And thank you for everyone for joining us here at Horizons. Thank you so much.